At 31, I finally reached a turning point with my misunderstanding husband. We had been married for 3 years, having initially met as colleagues before tying the knot. When we got married, I left my job, which was a common practice in our countryside community. Although the tradition felt restrictive, it was a significant factor in my decision to resign. My previous workplace was a small, somewhat insular company with a notably old-fashioned ethos reflecting its local roots. In that environment, it was nearly unthinkable for a married couple to continue working together, especially given the prevailing attitude that married women should not hold full-time jobs. This societal norm, coupled with the company's outdated views, made it clear that my role there was no longer sustainable. At my new job, I was treated like little more than an intern, while my husband remained in the same department as before. My responsibilities were limited to menial tasks such as making coffee, photocopying, and cleaning. Work that, while not inherently demeaning, was disproportionately assigned to me. It seemed like a deliberate attempt to push me out, as even the actual trainees weren't relegated to such monotonous duties all day. Discussing the issue with my husband proved futile. It was unclear whether he was even listening or simply avoiding the topic, perhaps because he feared that if I became a stay-at-home wife, we'd lose our financial flexibility. One day, my mother called to suggest I reach out to my cousin after hearing about my frustrations at work. She had discussed my situation with various relatives and acquaintances, and as a result, my cousin connected me with a job opportunity. A company where one of his classmates worked was hiring, and they believed my experience would be valuable, so he encouraged me to interview. I was fortunate enough to land the job, and I shared the exciting news with everyone. However, my husband's reaction was oddly muted. Though I found this strange, his lack of objection led me to go ahead and resign. My resignation was promptly accepted. They had clearly been expecting it. My colleagues, who had been gossiping about me, bid me farewell with insincere cheerfulness. "We'll miss you. Let's go out for drinks sometime. Feel free to reach out anytime." I couldn't help but wonder which of them truly meant it. My new job is located in the neighboring city, which, though smaller than a major metropolitan area, boasts an office district with a distinctly urban feel. Upon joining, I discovered that the company's culture was refreshingly modern. There was no bias based on age or gender, and the diverse workforce included several international employees. The company embraced equality, including fair pay, regardless of marital status. My salary has significantly increased compared to my previous job, to the point where I now earn nearly $10,000 more per year than my husband. This is likely due to the absence of gender discrimination. Both men and women receive equal pay for the same work. I haven't shared this with my husband yet, as I suspect he might have difficulty accepting it given his personality and the norms at my former workplace. My dissatisfaction with the workplace vanished, and I found myself genuinely fulfilled in my new role. However, not everything is perfect. My husband contributes nothing to housework, leaving me to handle everything on my own. Balancing full-time work with managing household chores for two people is incredibly draining. I leave for work earlier than he does and come home quite late, yet he never takes on any household responsibilities. Instead, he spends his time snacking and lounging on the couch, leaving the house messier each day. When I return, I'm greeted with requests like, "I'm hungry. Hurry up and make dinner," or similar demands for food, a bath, or coffee. Just hearing these requests is exhausting. Although I chose to work, and I suppose this situation is partly my responsibility, I now realize I might have been influenced by outdated notions and expectations at the time. Since we got married, my husband has repeatedly insisted on his own correctness while highlighting my shortcomings. He would say things like, "Work is tough because you lack the ability. If you want to manage both work and home, you need to try harder. If housework isn't going well, it's because you're inefficient. Get used to it and improve quickly. And since he chose to work, don't slack off on housework." These criticisms were a constant refrain. In rural areas, it's more common for men not to participate in housework compared to urban settings. Most of the married women I knew handled all household chores themselves, with some even managing childcare, caregiving, and farming. This environment led my husband to make me feel that it was natural for me to take on all the domestic responsibilities. Both my mother and mother-in-law were stay-at-home moms, and many women of my generation were either housewives or worked part-time. Despite being a full-time employee, I may have grown numb to the situation, simply accepting my husband's expectations and continuing with the housework as he dictated. Although my husband never explicitly told me to quit my job, I was determined to keep working even if he had. I convinced myself that since I was committed to my career, I couldn't neglect the housework. This routine persisted for a while. Even after I switched jobs, my husband remained in a bad mood when I came home after working late. I would apologize, prepare his dinner, and then rush through the housework, often barely having time to eat my own meal. One day, however, something changed. My husband found my wage statement, which I had carelessly left in a drawer. He stared at it in silence, and despite my attempts to downplay it by saying things like, "It's just because of overtime this time," or "maybe you'll earn more than me soon," my words had no effect. After that incident, my husband ignored me for days. He refused to speak or even look at me when I tried to communicate. Even if I stumbled or made a noise, he would completely ignore it. Eventually, I stopped attempting to engage with him, and just as I adjusted to this silent routine, he abruptly broke his silence. One evening, as I entered the living room after coming home, he shouted, "I'm home. What time do you think it is?" At my current job, there's a core time everyone is expected to be present, but the exact hours for arriving and leaving aren't strictly enforced, leading to varying departure times. Despite my efforts to start early and explaining my situation to my boss, I sometimes got home after 9 p.m. I would prepare ready-made or frozen meals that only needed reheating, yet my husband insisted on waiting for me to serve him. "You shouldn't slack off on housework. The only reason you can keep working is because I allow it," he would yell at me while I hurriedly prepared dinner. His intimidation was palpable throughout the entire exchange. "You're just going to skip cleaning and laundry and go to bed, making excuses that it's too late. You're coming home late on purpose to slack off." Even when I got home late, I diligently took care of the quieter housework tasks. Despite my efforts, the results were far from perfect, and I often felt I deserved the scolding I received. I blamed myself, accepting the criticism as warranted. "Monica, are you listening? Don't get too full of yourself just because you're working," he would say. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean it that way. I'm grateful for the opportunity to work. I'll try not to take it for granted." I genuinely believed this at the time. Perhaps I was led to believe it. To manage my workload, I took on extra weekend shifts to cut down on weekday overtime. I vacuumed and did laundry daily, trying my hardest to keep up with the household chores. A few months later, I had an epiphany. Why am I struggling so much on my own? The realization came after seeing a colleague's lunchbox. Her husband was responsible for cooking at their house and even prepared her lunch. I was taken aback, but my other colleagues seemed unfazed. They expressed envy but also remarked how normal it was to share household responsibilities when both partners worked. I couldn't bring myself to share my situation, as none of them appeared to be handling all the housework alone. When I casually asked relatives and friends about their household arrangements, I was astonished to find that none of their husbands did as little as mine. This realization led me to stop handling his share of the housework. I no longer cleaned his room or did his laundry, and I only prepared and heated food for myself. His yelling didn't bother me. I felt a healthy adult should be able to take care of themselves. I left for work much earlier than he did and returned home quite late. Why should I be burdened with household chores long after he had gone to bed? It wasn't fair for me to do all the housework. Even if he ranted about housework being a woman's job or a wife's duty, I ignored him and focused on eating. "So now you think you're something special just because you're earning a bit more money?" he exclaimed before storming out of the house. As I watched him leave, my heart felt cold. His focus on money and the insults he hurled at me made me realize that all my care and effort had been in vain. I couldn't endure it any longer. The next day, he stopped coming home. I assumed he would reach out if there was an issue, so I left the situation alone, only to find out he had moved back in with his parents. Whenever he returned to collect his things, we would have brief and tense discussions. Each time, he resorted to abuse and even shoved me a few times. It was supposed to be a final chance for us, but it felt futile. I was willing to consider rebuilding our relationship if he showed any willingness to compromise, but his actions made it clear that was impossible. Having made my decision, I began the process of filing for divorce. First, I casually brought it up with my mother during one of our regular conversations. She was very supportive, telling me that I had been patient enough and that the decision was long overdue. Next, I reached out to my mother-in-law on a weekend when my husband wasn't around. Although we didn't see each other often, she had always been kind and caring. She was initially surprised by my decision to consider divorce but assured me she would support me. After these discussions, I visited a lawyer to start the formal process. I presented evidence of my husband's behavior, including a timeline of events, my personal diary, photos of bruises from when he had shoved me, and recordings of his verbal abuse. The lawyer noted that while it was a borderline case for domestic violence liability, the evidence was substantial and worth pursuing. I decided to forgo dividing our assets in exchange for not asking for alimony. I rented a room near my workplace and began packing my things. On moving day, I confronted my husband to settle our affairs. He had been buying meals from the supermarket and coming home daily as he didn't want to inconvenience his parents. When I told him we needed to talk, he gave me the usual silent treatment. I wasn't deterred and said what I needed to. "We're getting a divorce. I'm moving out now. Please contact my lawyer." I left my lawyer's business card on the table, but he didn't even glance at it. He seemed to believe that by ignoring me, I would eventually beg for forgiveness. I left the house for good. Strangely, my husband continued to contact me afterward with messages unrelated to the divorce, such as asking to have a meal together or suggesting we go for a drive while shopping. When I ignored his messages, he sent even more desperate emails, accusing me of being stubborn and insisting he would forgive me if I came back and apologized. At the lawyer's office, he exuded overconfidence, expecting me to be the one in trouble and to break down in tears. With a smirk, he signed the divorce papers, treating the whole situation as if it were a mere formality. I quickly gathered the papers, anxious that he might change his mind and tear them up, and submitted them to the courthouse that same day. Later, my lawyer informed me that my husband hadn't believed I would actually follow through with the divorce. Once he realized I was serious, he started demanding alimony and a division of assets, but communication ceased shortly afterward. I suspect my mother-in-law might have intervened and scolded him to stop. Even after the divorce, I continued receiving bizarre emails from my ex-husband, which I chose to ignore. However, I unexpectedly ran into him one day while dining at a shopping center with friends from school. He was there with his colleagues who were former colleagues of mine, so I knew them all. The encounter was awkward for everyone. They managed to steer him away from our table. My friends, who had only met my ex-husband once at our wedding, found his presence unsettling. "That's my recently separated ex-husband. He's been following me around, and it's causing me distress," I explained to them. When I mentioned this to my friends, they approached his table and, as they walked by, they said, "He's a stalker." That's terrible. So creepy. My ex-husband, who was already uncomfortable around women, quickly retreated from the scene. After that encounter, the delusional emails from him ceased, and I've been enjoying my peaceful life on my own.